Hey, the video is going to start in a sec, but I just got to say thanks to Surfshark for sponsoring the video first, and now, the video, now.
What? What's going on? Where am I? What is this place? What?
Welcome to the nightmare.
Who are you? What?
If you want to survive the night, you're going to have to play a little game.
Game? No. Oh. Me, 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 me. Catherine is about how men should focus on self-improvement and their own choice and agency, and how systems that pit them against one another make them tear one another down instead of building each other up. They're awful and a nightmare, and also women's fault, if you think about it. The original 2011 game Catherine is about Vincent and his girlfriend Catherine with a K, an overbearing, dominant, career-minded woman whose hobbies include being mean, being a woman, hating fun, being a mean woman, ringing up Vincent every hour of the day to tell him not to see his friends or ever have fun ever, and being a woman who is mean. Vincent is out drinking one night when he meets Catherine with a C, a sexy young blonde woman who's instantly interested in him, and he starts cheating on Catherine with Catherine. Each night as Vincent drinks, chats to his friends, continues to sleep with Catherine with a C, generally feels shitty about everything but never makes any kind of tangible change, he's plagued by horrible nightmares where he climbs a block tower, constantly at risk of falling to his death. You see, if you fall in a dream and you don't wake up before you land, you die in real life. That's not what happened to this guy though. He just didn't take a glass of water with him when he went to bed. Kids, when your mum says hydration is important, she means it! These nightmares in which the dreamer sees everyone else but not themselves as weird humanoid sheep like this little fella, plague more and more men in the waking world are reporting having them, also one woman. We'll get back to that. As Vincent continues to ascend the block tower nightmares, he discovers that the man who runs the bar he and his friends drink at is actually Thomas Mutton, an immortal demon god who has been giving the nightmares to supposedly bad men to weed them out so more people will have reproductive relationships. Longtime viewers of this channel will know I'm a little quick to jump to calling things fascist or a bit eugenicsy, but Vincent also discovers that Catherine with a C is a shape-shifting succubus demon sent to seduce all of the men to test their commitment to their partners. I'm not going to say it's a foolproof plan. I'm not going to say it even really makes sense, but that's what she's there for. This game has some really solid performances. One character is voiced by Yuri Lowenthal, who you'll recognize as someone in practically every cartoon you've ever seen, and also Sasuke from Naruto. In this, he plays a menacing weirdo who lives in a box and asks Vincent bizarre questions that never fail to make you go,
What? What the fuck does that even mean? What's the moral answer to that? What does the game want me to say? Are you kidding? What?
The majority of the actual game takes place inside the nightmares, where you climb the towers, answer the false dichotomy questions, and then in the final round, every night, escape a boss. Some standout bosses include Catherine with a K, because Vincent hates his girlfriend, an ass with a mouth, because Vincent does ass stuff with Catherine with a C, a baby, because Vincent doesn't want a baby, Catherine again, but this time in a wedding dress, because Vincent hates his girlfriend, the baby again, but this time it's a cyborg with a chainsaw, because they were running out of ideas, and finally Thomas Mutton in a floaty chair with a big gun. As an aside, the game loudly declares edge whenever you connect a block by its edge to another block, which if you've ever played even a minute of this game, you will know is about half of the time you move any blocks. I'm going to put my cards on the table really early on here. I think Catherine, intentionally or unintentionally, espouses the ideology of some of the most deeply misogynistic people you can come across in life. Furthermore, I am very interested in revisions and additions made in the remake Catherine Fullbody. Some of it appears to be addressing criticisms of the original to various degrees of success, and others appear to be addressing the original on its own terms, and I find the way that it does both of those things absolutely fascinating. So let's dive in and find out whether this game really has a consistent philosophy, or whether it's all just edge.
Gotta be kidding me! The rated R superstar! Edge is here!
Part 1. Catherine with a K.
When the game first came out, it was praised as being complex and mature because of its choice-based moral system that delivers you the different endings, but Shadow the Hedgehog was critically panned, and if that isn't evidence that critics are completely out of touch with what makes a video game good, then I don't know what is. Catherine had 8 endings, and Catherine Fullbody has 13 fucking endings. I have put so many hours into this game, and I know it dwarfs the number of hours I've put into games I like, and I am really mad about that. I've already played 7 endings. When can I leave? This is a nightmare. And you know what else is a nightmare? All your favorite shows being blocked in your country. I personally get unendingly frustrated by shows I like on my favorite streaming services being limited by region. Luckily, Surfshark, a VPN I've been using for a little bit and I can confirm is very good, is offering 83% off to my viewers when they use the link in the description, surfshark.deals/Curio, plus a 30-day money-back guarantee in case you don't like it. Surfshark has tons of servers all around the world, plus individual servers in loads of different US states, so if one gets blocked, there are still plenty to choose from. That's something I was legitimately really impressed by when I first noticed it. Not to mention, Surfshark's clean web function stops you from going to dodgy sites, which could seriously ruin your day. And it has an inbuilt ad blocker. What are you waiting for? End the nightmare by going to surfshark.deals/Curio to get 83% off.
The nightmare's not over for you, though. You can't leave until you've learned the lesson.
What lesson? The remake is really an extra level built on top of the base game, almost like DLC, which makes it really easy to conceptualize the difference between Catherine and Catherine Fullbody. Catherine Fullbody, like an ogre, has layers. The original game is all about choosing between Catherine versus Catherine, also framed as light versus dark, good versus evil, and order versus chaos. Neither of them are really full characters, despite being the name on the cover. Catherine with a K just spends all her time telling Vincent not to have fun, and as it'll turn out, Catherine with a C is a demon succubus. In the best ending for Catherine with a K, you win her back after admitting your infidelity and have a wedding as soon as possible, right there in the bar, because Vincent is a fucking waste man. In the best ending for Catherine with a C, it turns out that Vincent is a clone made from alien DNA. No, that's Shadow the Hedgehog again. Fuck. At least Shadow the Hedgehog respects women. In the best ending for Catherine with a C, you go to live with her in hell, but because you proved what a total piece of shit you can be, Vincent turns out to be a really, really good demon, and he basically runs the place. He also rubs his relationship with Catherine in her demon dad's face, and there's an unpleasant and really bizarre cuckoldry subtext that I don't have 2 hours to get into right now. So what is Catherine trying to say? Well, Vincent is like Ebenezer Scrooge. We learn from other people's mistakes, including fictional characters. And in stories where something supernatural happens, the base assumption is that that character could never, or would never, change if it weren't for that paranormal intervention. Scrooge is a greedy old miser. He will never change. No earthly power could compel him to be nice to people. So instead he has to be frightened by an unearthly power. Similarly, Vincent is a character with a character flaw, but he isn't a well-thought-in capitalist. Vincent is a fuckboy. Vincent thinks that women are manipulating and controlling him, and that his GF is just really mean, but he also accepts that she's basically just way out of his league, and so rather than leaving a relationship he's obviously miserable in, he starts sleeping with another woman. The revelation the game is trying to drive at is that men should build each other up instead of tearing each other down. Vincent and the other sheepmen have been pushing each other off the blocks to get them out of the way so they can get to the top. But it's the shared advice and shared knowledge that helps Vincent get to the end and defeat Thomas Mutton. Ultimately, the block wall serves as a metaphor for self-improvement. The good endings with Catherine and Catherine are both pretty acceptable to the player. The bar wedding ending emphasizing settling down and finding safety and security in going the normal route. The demon dad cuck ending emphasizing personal choice and freedom, breaking away from the herd. The bad endings, where Catherine and Catherine both leave Vincent, don't really feel like very real endings. They're quite rushed and simplistic, and in the remake they don't have the Ode to Joy credit sequence with the snapshots showing what happens later on for them. They feel like endings players will be really disappointed to get, causing them to start the game over and aim harder for the ending they were trying for. The game doesn't seem to endorse either choice, but it does want you to do something, which drives, again, towards its central point about agency. The game wants the player to either actively embrace the trad life or fully reject it. Or does it? Both of the good endings show Vincent siding with the stated goals of Thomas Mutton, the literal, actual devil who wants to force men into reproductive relationships. So either the game is about how reproductive relationships are an evil trap, or it's about how men should choose their own destiny. But either way, for that to be the metaphysical Scrooge-like revelation the audience is supposed to arrive at through playing as Vincent, the audience is supposed to be incels. What were incels? According to sources today, they were a group of young, angry men infuriated by the notion that they couldn't get the attention of women, who formed highly toxic communities rife with misogyny, homophobia, transphobia, and racism, that focused largely on these young men and boys, criticizing themselves and one another in an attempt to explain why, in the parlance of the time, they were so unfuckable. As we all know, when World President Ocasio-Cortez passed the Sixth Amendment, redefining sexual attraction as a form of artistic expression and outlawing being horny on Main, incels were rendered obsolete. There is a community online largely comprised of former incels who call themselves men going their own way, who, unlike their more famous counterparts, aren't constantly obsessed with dating and aren't convinced they can never get a date, but just like incels, they do have a deeply held mistrust or even hatred of women, and their worldview is derived from the same place. They think women are trying to trick, manipulate, and control men, and the reason these men choose to go their own way is because they're sick of it. They're conscientious objectors in the incel gender war. The men going their own way, or MGTOW community, is a place for straight men to discuss their plans that actively resist the normalized plan of getting married and having kids. To that effect, they talk about pickup artistry, or wax philosophical about how hiring a prostitute is just like having a girlfriend, but more honest, or otherwise enjoy hating women and embrace being alone. In many ways, the MGTOW is the graduated, enlightened form of the incel, and the game, Catherine, kind of espouses their worldview. Catherine with a K is horribly controlling and mean, and spends pretty much all of her time trying to get Vincent to stop spending time with his friends and having fun like some sort of Ferris Bueller villain. But looking at their relationship for more than 10 seconds, it's kind of obvious Catherine with a K is an abusive partner. The game's solution to this, for the most part, is that Vincent should be more successful and be more grateful for his mean GF. On the other Catherine, Catherine with a C, is just showing up in Vincent's bed every night, even though he's pleading with her not to. And that's not presented as an issue of consent, it's just her being too sexy for him to refuse in the drunken stupor between scenes that we don't see. It's not just that the game holds men in low esteem, though. It treats male sexuality as inherently predatory. That's why Catherine with a K treating him like that is treated as alright, and Catherine with a C can't possibly be ignoring Vincent's right to consent, because men just want sex all the time, right? So as long as Vincent's having his wicked way with these women, he's getting his end of the bargain. That's what's so inherently, intensely MGTOW about all this. This is essentially the authorial intent version of understanding this game, but the analysis of this game, like the game itself, has multiple different endings. And how could it not? The fact the authors were so worried you might not have gotten what they meant by that they practically show their whole entire ass, makes it impossible to ignore who they are, what they think about, what they meant, what their ideology is, when you think about what the game is about. To put it frankly, What the game is about and what the game is trying to say are two very different things.
Part 2. Catherine with a C.
Catherine Full Body, the game takes great pains to explain to you, is named after the way that wine is rated, which is also named after how women's bodies are.
This is Catherine, but with a fuller body. It's aged nicely, with a sensual flavor, not unlike a fine wine.
It really dedicates a whole narrated segment to explain that wine can be light, medium, or full, and then that's like women, and then that's like why the game is like that.
Fellas, we've all been there. You're in the bar when you spot a fine broad, brace yourself and deliver your opening line.
Hey baby, anybody ever tell you got a seriously medium body? I want to look at the changes made in Catherine Full Body, but first, before we continue, I think I should acknowledge that there is a translation issue, both lingual and cultural. It's important to acknowledge I have a Western perspective from which I am critiquing this Japanese game. There are certain attitudes towards gender, sexuality, and relationships that might be normal for Japan, but I'm not privy to since I don't live in Japan. On the one hand, it means I can hold these things to a moral standard, but on the other hand, it means I don't necessarily know where the authors are coming from. If there are attitudes and behaviors that are normal for Japan, the meaning that the authors are trying to convey will have a different direction and magnitude, and I won't know that since I live in England and have my view shaped by what's normal among the English. So who were the English? Though little survives today, our sources suggest that the English were a nation of people who with increasing fervour and enthusiasm voted in politicians who ripped the nation, the public infrastructure, and ultimately the people themselves to shreds. Twitter posts from the year 2020 suggest that these politicians may have been some kind of vampires, or perhaps leopard people. And although the nature of these politicians remains a mystery, one thing remains certain. That is that these politicians derived sheer, possibly sexual, pleasure from killing the poor. As I mentioned before, Catherine Full Body has 13 different endings, with different outcomes for getting together with different characters, plus good and bad variations for how well you matched your morals to the character in question. Who would be responsible if you cheated, for example, has two answers. It'd be my fault puts you on the angelic, good, moral path towards staying with Catherine with a K. The person I cheated with puts you on the demonic, amoral, bad path towards getting together with Catherine with a C. To be clear, you do not have to do anything in your actual gameplay that engages the characters in order to get the endings where Vincent gets together with them. Talking to women is not the way to get them to marry you. In Catherine, as in life, only knowing the correct answers to Sasuke's riddles can win a woman's heart. There's also an extra secret ending for players who complete all the side content where Trisha, the woman from the framing device, reveals she is secretly Ishtar, the goddess of fertility. You know Ishtar, she's the one all those mad lads in Babylon were so crazy about they built a massive gate entirely out of blue, which back in 575 BC was the most expensive item in the world. Anyway, that's her, that's Trisha, and she decides that you, not Vincent, but you, the player, are a worthy mate because you're so good at video game, and then she comes to your house to do a big fuck on you. That's actually in the game. Also, she and Astaroth, Sasuke, are the same character. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this information, and I'm sure you won't know what you're supposed to do with it either, but nonetheless, it is now yours. Returning to Vincent as the author-audience insert, the stepping stone character, it's probably the way the game treats him as not really responsible for any of his garbage actions that makes him so basically detestable. In the loading screen of the game, every time you load up Catherine Full Body, Vincent is tied down, clearly in a state of torment in between the three love interests. Oh no, poor Vincent. The additions the developers chose to make to the basic game are so fascinating to me because instead of choosing to address any of the glaring, bizarre, intense misogyny, they just wanted to add more of the same. There are big opportunities to flesh out the world. Like the baby that chases Vincent up the block tower screaming, "Daddy, don't leave me." What if that's because Vincent never knew his father? No, it's just that he doesn't want a baby. They added in alternate endings for Catherine, and they added in a third love interest. In Catherine with a K's alternate ending, she realizes how extremely out of Vincent's league she is and starts focusing on her own life and career, and with all the free time she has now, she becomes a massive success and has millionaire men throwing themselves at her feet begging for a date. In Catherine with a C's alternate ending, she goes back in time and becomes Vincent's high school girlfriend. At first blush, it might seem like Catherine with a K's alternate ending shows some growth. She realizes that she's not happy with Vincent, and so she moves on and picks the option which is healthier for both of them. But then when you see that Vincent pursues her,
I'll be back as a better man!
you realize it's really just there to punish Vincent's behavior. And the main thing it reminds me of is Captain Voyeur.
Captain Voyeur was a short student art film written and directed by John Carpenter when he was still a student at USC. It's about 8 minutes long. In the film, a man working in an office is clearly sexually frustrated. He goes home, dons a cape, mask, pants, and nothing else, and ventures forth into the night as the titular Captain Voyeur. Voyeur first looks in the window of a couple having sex who seem to be aware he's watching. He moves on. Then he looks in the window of someone who's hanging up sexy lingerie, and is excited before realizing the lingerie belongs to a cross-dresser. He moves on. He comes to the window of a woman who is undressing and seems to have found what he's looking for, but then she spots him, pulls out a gun, and shoots him.
The overall effect of Catherine is in some ways not unlike Captain Voyeur. The audience gets to engage in Vincent's shittiness in a way that is simultaneously constantly self-flagellating but also totally useless. It's masochistic masturbation. Vincent showing us that men are terrible and the worst doesn't actually address any ways that men's behavior can actually be harmful. It just lets the player feel guilty for a little while and then get let off the hook without actually changing anything. It's like when you apologize for not doing the washing up and then your partner just stops dead exactly halfway through doing it and says, cool, well, you can do it later then. And that's not what you wanted, you just wanted the washing up to be done. Female revenge fantasies written by men are often this way, simply self-hating without any actual prompt for change and ultimately done in a way that lets men off the hook anyway. So when you see this ending, you might realize it's not been written to make Catherine with a K into a fleshed out, fully rounded, real-seeming character. It's there to beat Vincent down and crush him for not taking care of his big, strong GF. And that's all Catherine with a K was really there for in the first place. Remember when I said before that Vincent was like Ebenezer Scrooge? What really bothers me about Catherine Full Body is that Catherine supposes that the audience needs the paranormal example of Vincent to learn from. And if that change had happened, you'd expect that the remake, with nearly a decade of reflection and life experience in between, would be clearly and consciously different. You'd expect the remake to address some of the naivety and rampant sexism of the original. But no, Ebenezer Scrooge woke up the day after Christmas and said, you know what? I was right the first time. Orphans can fucking eat shit. And then there's the third love interest.
To be honest, I made the site with fans like you in mind.
Fans like me?
I just mean that I love to see young girls like you finding community in their interests.
Huh?
You mean the sharing interests comment, yes? I'm saying that it's nice to have a show that feels like it's unashamedly for us. It's just so rare to see feminine media that doesn't talk down to us girls, isn't it? I made PG Fans because I believe in that. Well, also because I originally submitted it as an assignment for my college graphic design class, and I'm really glad when other people can enjoy it too.
Made for girls. Like us. Girls, yeah.
Well, yes.
Girls.
Are you feeling alright?
Girls! I mean, never better, actually.
Well, okay then. It's just that you seem a little... Never mind, I'm just overthinking things, like I always do. As I said, I'm really glad that PG Fans is important to you. Girls should be able to enjoy the shows they like. Besides... It's not like anyone is coming to stop you, right?
Part 3. Rin.
When I assert that in Catherine Full Body I may have found the single video game that hates women the most, you might not agree with me based on what we've discussed so far. But so far we haven't discussed Rin. In the original game, the waitress at the bar Vincent and his friends drink at, Erica, admits to also having the nightmares, which is strange. Maybe the nightmares don't only affect men. Toby, the youngest of Vincent's group, has a massive crush on Erica and makes it clear that he wants to start dating as soon as possible as he's a virgin. Later in the game he goes on a date with Erica and sleeps with her, and he's humiliated when he discovers that she is a trans woman. The game is pretty consistently awful about this. In one of the endings, Toby is moaning about how he wishes he could settle down, and Erica pops up to cheekily remind him that he'll always have her, and he explicitly says that he wishes he was still a virgin. It's pretty fucking awful, actually. Erica isn't treated as a character with agency or a rich internal life, and certainly not with feelings that the other characters care about. During the development of the remake last year, Erin Fitzgerald, the voice of Erica, retweeted a fan who was angry about the transphobia in Catherine. She backpedaled afterwards, saying that the retweet had only been for the kind words about Erica, but she went on to imply, and even say in posts on Discord, that the English translation had the transphobia toned down compared to the Japanese release. Like, this is the toned down version. Erica and her portrayal is something the original received a lot of criticism for, and even as a baseline, doing nothing to revisit and address Erica is pretty shitty. But Rin, the third love interest introduced in Catherine Full Body, is also a trans woman. So to my mind, it's pretty clear that this is an attempt to show some of that growth since making the original. Rin has amnesia and has forgotten who she is, and Vincent's instinct is to protect and defend her, which is an okay-ish start. But then Vincent and the repeated framing of the game treat her like a child. There is an unsettling crossover of sexualization and infantilization here, and with little more than Vincent just being around and creepily staring at her, Rin falls madly in love with him. You may have already guessed, but to get the Rin ending, you don't have to talk to her much or treat her well, you just have to answer Sasuke's riddles. There's an assumption here that trans women should be grateful for anyone wanting to date them. The focus is always on Vincent and Toby, how they feel, whether it makes them gay being into trans women, never on trans women and how they feel about having to date notorious fuckboy Vincent. The game is very sure that Vincent's attraction to Rin makes him gay, but it won't explicitly come out and say it, at least in the English version. Rin is consistently gendered she and her up until the reveal, and afterwards she's they and them, and not exactly a woman, and even at one point a guy. The game uses a version of the trap narrative that perpetuates the idea that trans women want to trick men into being gay. The narrative that they go with the most pernicious possible version of with Erica. With Rin, they try to soften the trope by making her a born sexy yesterday, wide-eyed, childish innocent. She's not trying to actively trick Vincent. He's just attracted to her. Even the questions to unlock the Rin ending don't work the same way as the rest of the game. With Catherine and Catherine, you're piloting Vincent's morality towards a vague destination, but with Rin you have to answer exactly correctly every time, and then pick the right dialogue options in a cutscene in Vincent's imagination, a sort of point of no return. And the questions are like, would you be okay with any secret your partner might have? The game is checking and double checking and triple checking that this is the ending you want, so that it isn't tricking you into doing a gay. Something particularly insidious is that the game positions itself as young people, as somewhat progressive. It isn't, when I worked, lad, we couldn't afford any of these fancy genders you have nowadays. It's trying to be, yeah, bruh. I mean, like, whatever, like, all lives matter to me, like, you could be a man, a woman, like, an alien, like, it makes no difference to me, like, no, I'm not gay. No, I'm not gay. No, it just makes no difference to me, yeah. Because of this, the game shows an odd mix of trying to be understanding, showing what real-world transphobia looks like, and its own horrific and also flimsily lampshaded bigotry inserted in there alongside. When Vincent explains that he reacted badly to the revelation to his friends, they pretty universally call him a total asshole.
Don't tell me you lashed out over this.
When Vincent nears the end of the Rin storyline, in a dream sequence that usually contains Catherine and Catherine trying to kill each other, Vincent instead walks in on Catherine having brutally slaughtered Rin with a kitchen knife, before Catherine refers to her as that thing. When Vincent admits to being in love with Rin, Johnny instantly punches him right in the face. When Vincent sees Rin naked and asks, "Rin, are you a guy?" she says, "Yes, that's right." Fuck it, I'm done with this game. This stupid fucking game, it sucks, okay? There's no point, there's no lesson. It just doesn't treat women like people, okay? Do you know women are people?
Congratulations! That's the lesson of the game. You're free to go now.
Oh, fuck you! The art book that comes with the special launch edition of Catherine Fullbody talks about Rin at length without using pronouns for her at all, as if it would have been some kind of spoiler. The game really dedicates a lot of time to the debate over whether she's a woman, a man, or something else in between. And then, none of that matters anyway because she's... well... In Rin's good ending, her brother, a huge android angel, arrives to confront Vincent, revealing that Rin too is an angel and she was sent to protect the men from the nightmares. Vincent and Rin, wishing to be together, tell her brother about their budding affection and he is furious. Vincent defeats the final block tower level to prove his worthiness, and Rin's brother explodes from sheer fury, revealing his true form underneath the robotics. And then, at 3 AM, live on Twitch, my brain broke.
It's logic. It's minions! It's minions! It's minions! It's minions! Those are minions! That was minions! It was minions! Those were minions! That was minions! That was minions! That was minions! He exploded! He was made of minions! Those were minions! That's minions! He's minions! Those were minions! That's minions! That was minions! That was minions! That's minions! That was 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 minions! Yeah. Is she minions?
Rin's brother was a mech suit piloted by dozens of tiny pink aliens. And the game implies that Rin's true form is probably this as well, although Vincent, having already accepted that he's in love with a trans woman, says he doesn't really care. If she's secretly a guy, she might as well be secretly a minions. I hope I don't need to explain how far this bullshit misses the mark. It shouldn't be that hard to figure out that what trans women want is to be accepted as women, not accepted for how weird they are, like an alien. Rin might be non-binary even, she might not be a woman, but again, to my mind, they clearly wrote her in to address the heat they got from the portrayal of Erica, so they're clearly trying to answer the question, is a trans woman a woman? Yes, a trans woman is a woman. She is not a man. And she's certainly not a minions.
First and foremost, I'd like to thank all trans people for being valid as hell and kicking ass every single day. I'd also like to thank Baphometrics for the wonderful music they make that I used in this video, as well as Laura Crone for contributing her voice talents as Jenny from Secret Little Haven, Lily for letting me use her excellent new song in the credits here, all the people who helped me to research and write this essay, and once again Surfshark for sponsoring the video. Of course, not forgetting my patrons who make all my work possible by paying for my lavish lifestyle of pot noodles and Pepsi, and you, the viewer, for watching all the way to the end. As ever, if you want to support the channel and also get access to lots of cool, neat bonus content, you can give me $2, or more than $2, over at patreon.com/CurioVids. Bye for now.